That's the point. If you're a Troy homeowner, property owner, and something is required, you might expect that somebody would help you understand that so you could meet the requirements, which is what happened here. So, did they have a certificate of occupancy? No. Is that unusual? No. Is it remarkable? No. Did we act on anybody else in the city during that week? No. We picked this place to act on because the march against the police or against police brutality had been planned there.
Well, again, I disagree with that because there's no evidence of that, but you agree, I believe there's no evidence of that, but you agree with me that they were in violation of the city code by occupying the building without a certificate of occupancy. So are you asking me to ignore that when the city was on notice, and when they are occupying the building, when they're having events, when they're having parties, that they were posting on the internet, posting on Facebook, and God forbid something happened, then we're dealing with a different situation.
You should act on that building in the same manner that you act on every other building. If you act uniformly, then we have no political discrimination. If you select somebody who's criticizing the city and act in very special ways, punishing the landlord and other tenants and etc., there's a problem.
I'm asking about me, myself. I had nothing to do with sending anyone to 51 3rd Street. I do not run the code department. I cannot speak for Mr. Dunn or what he did or what he did not do. I am saying the situation that was presented to me as the city's lawyer, when I'm made aware of an obvious and blatant violation of the law, am I supposed to ignore that?
Obvious and blatant? Then what matter? The landlord didn't even know what a certificate of occupancy is. No one ever asked him about it, and nobody ever does. So,
were they not?
Obvious and blatant.
Yes,
the obvious and blatant thing is,
he
had a tenant who wanted to protest something, and you took action against that person. This is not communist China.
Excuse me.
We're America.
Excuse me. I didn't take action against anyone.
You didn't take action when I asked you to. I said, let's take it down to not embarrass the mayor.
You asked me.
Gentlemen, let's slow down.
Okay.
You asked me to pull a ticket, which is otherwise validly issued.
Yes.
And how is that not proper? How is that not improper?
Because we could have pulled it down and had a discussion the following week. We could have found out that the landlord knows nothing about this. We could have taken reasonable and kind communication with our citizens. That's what our administration should be.
Is it not a liability issue for the city if we're on notice of this building being occupied against the code and we ignore it and something happens? Is there not a liability issue?
I guess one of the things that we...
Taking the hard line.
I just want to let Councilwoman Robertson interject. She has a question for
problem.
Mr. Silverman. One of the things that came up during the testimony of Commissioner Dunn was how that notice was obtained and how that notice was found. And that's, I think, and also Mr. Sheeran also discussed how that notice is typically delivered to the code department. And this was delivered in an unusual way. Rumors on a block. Councilwoman Robertson has a question.
Can I suggest that before you speak? I don't mean to interrupt.
Sure.
Again, my role is the city attorney. I'm not a code officer. I'm not Mr. Dunn. I can't speak for Mr. Dunn. I'm presented with a situation in which this could expose the city to liability.
You were presented with a rumor.
No. I was presented with this. I was presented with this after the
right.
fact it was done. After the fact that they posted it if they're not having a certificate of occupancy. And I posted 2 questions I asked. 1, was it occupied? 2, was there a certificate of occupancy? I'm not going to ignore that.
Mr. President, I would like to get back to me after.
Yeah, absolutely. Councilwoman Robertson.
Well, one of my questions was, when were you notified of the situation?
First time I ever heard of 51 3rd Street was probably about 4:45 on that Friday. When Kathleen Cassidy came in and mentioned it to me, I had no idea what 51 3rd Street was. I had no idea there was any activity going on in there. I had no idea. I simply was told that they were posted for not having a certificate of occupancy, and I asked the 2 questions that I told you again. Was it occupied? Yes. Did they have a certificate of occupancy? No.
Can I ask if any other notices were brought to your attention that day or even that week or even the week before of other buildings that had been posted in the same manner?
No.
Did you not find it unusual that this one in particular?
Well, it was posted because Mr. Doherty called the mayor's office. The reason it became my attention was Mr. Doherty called the mayor's office with a complaint. Otherwise, I would have had no idea. We have an attorney in my office, Matt Foley, who does code court. He handles all the code tickets. I imagine on any given Wednesday he has more than 1 or 2 certificate of occupancy tickets, which are not brought to my attention. The only reason I ever became aware of this is because Mr. Doherty called the mayor's office with a complaint.
In the other situation you just talked about, King Street. Those buildings were given notice, I assume the owner was given notice back in 2011?
That's what the reports indicate, yes.
And they were brought down to 13, so it's had a little more than 2 years. Imminent danger, pretty much. This person owned this building 12 years. Never once received a letter from the city or from anybody saying, guess what? You need to have a certificate of occupancy. Wasn't one on the, I believe there was one in the building from the previous owner. No one told me it didn't grandfather over. There's no indication, it seems to me, that any effort was made to bring him into, bring him up to speed as far as knowledge goes and give him an opportunity to come into the client. I'm just wondering, is that normal? Is it when you have a place where you know that there are several people living in there, to place a notice that says pretty much that everybody has to get out on Christmas, on New Year's Eve, no less? Wouldn't common courtesy say, you know what? Maybe this person is in violation. How long have they had this building? They've had it 12 years. They probably don't even know they need it. Would it really hurt us to wait till the first business day of the year to go and knock on his door and talk to the gentleman personally and say, well, I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, with my mistake. But to talk to him the first business day and say, look, we have this ordinance on law, then you have to comply, and this is what you need to do. It didn't affect just the owner. It also affected everyone else that lived in the building. Is there no consideration for the human element in any of this? It gives the appearance of, I don't know. I mean, it makes it look, as Mr. Doherty is saying, that it just doesn't feel kosher, so to speak.
Well, I respectfully disagree again. And again, I think I've somewhat unfairly been called to account to answer for people who I can't answer for. I simply, my involvement in this was minimal. It was, I was presented with the situation after the fact. And I had 2 alternatives. The one Mr. Doherty wants me to do is ignore a violation of our code. The other was to enforce the code. And, if I ignored it, the city was on notice, and something, God forbid, happened, then you'd be saying, why didn't you act? It's the equivalent of if I go 50 miles an hour and 30 on the way home, and you say everybody else was speeding too, but they stopped me, it doesn't mean I'm any less guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also the equivalent of if this same individual came and spoke at one of these hearings and got pulled over for going 50 and a 30, can you make that tenuous argument that that was a First Amendment retaliation? Because you do have First Amendment protections, but your First Amendment protection is not a shield for you to be immune from any enforcement of the laws?
No, well, I don't think that's what anyone here is saying.
Well, I think it is. I don't think Mr. Doherty is arguing, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think you're arguing that this wasn't a validly issued ticket. I think you're saying it shouldn't have been issued because there was sensitive speech on the periphery of this.
I'd be happy to correct her. She has the floor.
We're going to go back to
I did
council.
not ask you to ignore code violations. I asked you to be appreciative of the Constitution of the United States. And it happens that the violation I asked you to take down affected the whole building, and code was only concerned about the first floor. So you had tenants being evicted over issues that they had no idea of, that we didn't even intend, and that the suggestion from me to you to take this down was an excellent suggestion. Thank goodness nobody did throw those people out or take actions against them. And they basically ignored it because they thought it was a political act. and I agreed with them. And when you continue to say, I asked you to ignore the violations of city code, I asked you to appreciate with me the importance of the Constitution and work with me to protect the rights of the people in my district. Now,
Well, can I address that? I certainly do appreciate the Constitution. I spent 2 years at the New York Civil Liberties Union as an unpaid attorney in law school, volunteering my time, so I certainly do respect the First Amendment. I respect the entire Bill of Rights. I respect the Constitution. As an attorney, I've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. I find it objectionable for you to say I don't. And secondly, I would like to just address this. The fact that you say, without any more evidence, that there was First Amendment retaliation, or this ticket was issued solely because of the speech, without any more evidence than that, does not make it so.
when the Commissioner of Planning comes here, gives us a memo and testifies,
And what
that he read the blog that was posted on Jim Franco's blog on the prior evening at 7 o'clock. He read that at 5 in the morning. He came in and there was an eviction notice on that building within 6 hours. To me, I don't have to say anything further. It's painfully obvious why this happened.
And that's your opinion.
It's
It is
actually,
my opinion.
it's his opinion, but I don't think you were here for that testimony, but it was very interesting. I asked Commissioner Dunn if he thought this was political, and he said no, and I think the entire room erupted in laughter because it's painfully obvious to everyone, except maybe you.
We can change that. I think it's clear we have a difference. I'd like to ask you a different question.
Can I address Council President
Sure.
Wilson? I certainly don't think I'm alone in this, and I think, I agreed to show up here voluntarily tonight, and I think I should be treated with respect and not subject to rude and snide comments.
I think that you need to respect the council that you're sitting here. Thank you.
I certainly have to go back to two-way street, Ron.
It is a two-way street. You're not getting anything but respect from us. Councilman Zaluski has a question. Mr. President.
Two follow-up questions. Can I finish my questions and then take them?
Acceptable? That's fine.
You testified that you attended a Monday morning senior staff meeting. Was there a Friday morning senior staff meeting?
No, we have our senior staff meetings every Monday.
Did any other person talk to you about this prior to its enactment? Did Bill Dunn come to you?
About 51 3rd Street?
Yes.
First I ever heard of it was about 4:45 on that Friday after you placed a call to Kathleen Cassidy, and Kathleen Cassidy entered my office. Had no idea what 51 3rd Street was.
Subsequent to January 31st, did you have any conversations in the next 2 weeks or so with the senior staff about 51 3rd Street and appraise them if there's a violation, it should stay up?
I know the mayor had a meeting that next morning, which I didn't attend because I took my son to see Sesame Street Live that Saturday, so I was not in attendance for it. I know he met with some of the code officers. I don't know if Mr. Dunn was present, but no.
On Saturday?
Yes, he called them in on Saturday to find out what was going on.
Okay, because what surprised me as I went from my 2 meetings with Peter Ryan about this, my immediate phone conversation with Bill Dunn after I talked to Kathleen, and a later conversation with the mayor, is everybody used the exact words. They all said to me, if code thinks there's a liability, then the eviction notice should stand. And it struck me peculiar that everybody used the same language. And I began to conclude and wonder if everybody had talked about this in a group. Because it just seemed I was being stonewalled throughout these months when I wanted to come down. It never came down until we started the hearings, and then there was some assistance given to the building owner, and we moved it through. It just was very strange to me. It seemed to me a retaliatory action to start with, and then a collusion of Stonewall without any real dialogue. I mean, I'm a councilman. I went twice to Peter, I went to the mayor, I went to Bill Dunn, and it's caused tremendous rifts. It's caused a rift with you and I politically in that other way.
Councilman, I have no rift with you. You're the one who came into my office and told me you didn't like it.
Well, I supported a different candidate.
No, you came into my office and said you did not like me.
I worked very hard in that.
You came into my office and said I
The only
do
reason
not
I
like
did it was we didn't agree.
Councilman
Mr.
Zaluski.
President, I do like you, Ian.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate that.
Speeding, you brought up as an example of if everyone is exceeding the speed limit and then you get pulled over, you can't say, well, everyone else was doing it. I get that. Code violations are a little bit different in my opinion because a lot of people don't know if they're in violation. And I'm going to venture a guess because we're talking about liability. We're a city that's old, has lots of historic architecture. I'm guessing half of the buildings in the city, I'm throwing that out there, are in violation of code.
Maybe right.
So I guess my question is, isn't all code enforcement by its very nature somewhat random, somewhat arbitrary?
I don't know if I'd use the word arbitrary. Random, yes, because a lot of times the code violations are only discovered when the code officers are called to a specific location. You're right, there could be locations which are in violation of code but they're unaware of it. The code department did become aware of this violation. I grant there probably are other buildings in the city of Troy that are in the same situation, but the code department was aware of this one.
All right, so if I make you aware right now and I say, I think pretty much, in downtown Troy, half of the buildings on 2nd Street are in violation of code. I've just put the city on notice. Now, if something happens, is the city liable?
I think that's a bit different situation than what I was talking about earlier. That's just guesswork. The situation was we knew. It wasn't a guess, it wasn't hypothetical. We knew. At that point, there is real liability attached. There is notice. We're talking about a possibility.
Okay.
If you said specifically that, 34 2nd Street doesn't have a certificate of occupancy and we went to address it and it didn't, that's a similar situation.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because if you recall when I was questioning Dave Sheeran from Code, that was one of my questions. How were you able to figure out that 51 3rd Street did not have a CO? And he said, well, I went into CityView or whatever system is used and I looked up the property and it said no CO. It was that easy. He did it, he said, in 3 minutes or less.
Okay.
So we have a database of all the properties in the city. We know right now, today, which properties do not have COs. What action has the city taken to contact those owners?
Well, there's two things. First of all, it's not illegal to not have a CO. It's illegal to not have a CO in an occupied building. So you may not have a CO and you're not in violation of the law. The building is unoccupied.
Okay. Do you yourself have any idea how many buildings right now do not have COs, and then of that percentage of buildings, how many are occupied or not
I
occupied?
have no idea.
Is the city liable?
Is the city liable? If we're on notice, we are.
The fact that the city right now can generate, and I had this conversation with the mayor several days after this was brought to my attention by Councilman Doherty, and the mayor and I talked on the phone. We went through a lot of everything that we hear today and at previous hearings. We had this conversation, and I said, Mayor, we have the information already. It's sitting in our database. So the fact that it's there, we know which buildings don't have COs. Would it just make sense to send out letters saying you don't have a CO, I expect a response? And then either the response is my building is unoccupied, I don't have to have a CO, or I didn't realize I needed it, I'm going to apply for a CO.
Is that possible? Yes. I mean, that could be one of your recommendations that comes from this hearing.
I need some clarification on what you just talked about, and I just want you to substantiate, or if you're familiar enough with this process, what Dave Sheeran had clarified for us, because what he explained is that the residential component of the building that has been occupied continuously does not need a certificate of occupancy as compared to the first floor storefront area, which does require a certificate of occupancy when it changes use or changes hands. And that was actually the component of this building that failed to have a CO. There is no such thing as a CO for a residential unit unless we're talking a mega complex. That's correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, so this notice that went up, which says the entire building must be vacated immediately, to any reasonable person here would think that it means the whole building, not the first floor or the general space or the storefront, and it doesn't indicate that the storefront just doesn't have a CO.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any other questions or commentary from Mr. Silverman? Okay, thank you for your time.